Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we're going to begin, we're going to look at Unit 7.4, Economy in the Interwar Period. And we're going to be really just looking at how different governments responded to the economic crisis after 1900. All right, so specifically looking at how some governments, referred to reacted to the Great Depression. All right, so, and obviously we're going to be using the Soviet Union as a case study, but also some of these kind of fascist corporatist economies and the government of Brazil. So if you kind of scroll up on the website that you're watching this on right now, I did drop in some facts about how fascist Italy, Japan, Germany dealt with the realities of the 1930s. Also, Brazil, right? So, Brazil makes its own little run at fascism during the 1930s. And, so the policies of Vargas, right? And of course, New Deal policies. So feel free to read through those and kind of look through those and to develop a little bit of a deeper understanding of the content that we're talking about today. All right. So, and also, of course, one thing to kind of keep in mind when we talk about the economic crisis, we could be referring to the economic crisis of 1921 to 1923, and that is a specific to Germany, right? A hyperinflation crisis that was created because of their own policies and how they were dealing with the debt. Reparations that were saddled onto Japan from the Treaty of Versailles. The Dawes Plan the United States will use, will facilitate a restructuring of that debt, and so the Dawes Plan is the kind of U.S. restructuring of that debt to kind of restabilize the economy of Germany. Right, so and you will see a rebounding of that. But for the most part, when you're talking about the economic challenges of the 30s, in the 20th century, you're usually talking about the Great Depression, right? Not the not the economic depression in Germany from 1921 to 23. So the Great Depression starts in 1939, runs into the 1940s. And for the most part, you guys are all aware of kind of ins and outs of what causes the Great Depression, the margin buying, the kind of policies, the banking policies, which don't cause it but exasperate the Great Depression. And then of course, how does the United States deal with this? And of course, if you're talking about the United States, it's a combination of both. Herbert Hoover, because he is president when the Great Depression begins in 1929 until he is, he does not win re-election in 1932, and then we start to see the Roosevelt plans. All right, so as far as kind of how to look at this kind of stuff, let's do some notes, and there's a few ways you can kind of look at this kind of information, so what I'm gonna do is probably cover this information in a way that I guess is most likely to help you take notes on it. And I'm gonna work under a claim. Right? I'm gonna work under an assertion, and I will draw that assertion out for you. Okay. Right. Of course, what I'm doing is not my own. I am, like all things, borrowing my ideas. All right, so let's. All right. So I guess the first thing to kind of take care of is what is this, and let's stop doing this. If you're looking at government and you're looking at economics, one of the easiest ways to look at stuff like this would be, within government, Let's just kind of call this classical liberalism. All right, classical liberalism. And then let's just call this kind of free market. Right, free market economics. All right, and then out on either extreme, like out on the left, you always see communism. Out on the far right, there's fascism. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just bending this thing. Right, I'm just bending this thing, and there's plenty of criticisms and critiques of this on the interweb. But I'm gonna work with the assertion, right, under the claim that communism, right, communism, and you can put socialism as well. We start using the word communism only because during the Russian Civil War, Lenin starts using the word communism as a way to differentiate himself from the other socialist groups, the SRs, the Mensheviks, the other coalitions that called themselves socialists that we would kind of fall into the category of the whites during the Russian Civil War. So Lenin starts using the word communism. So let's just kind of throw the word communism in there. All right, so we have communism and we have fascism. So I'll work under the assertion that fascism is communism and communism is fascism, and that the similarities are much greater than the differences of the two. So if I'm going to make that assertion, I'm obviously going to support it with some evidence. So I'm going to give you some evidence for here. So, but I don't want to completely, so when we deal with this, we're looking at how, countries like the Soviet Union or the Nazi Germany, right, how they deal with the economic crisis. And I did put a little divergent over here, right? So we will call that Stalinism, right? And we will see Stalinism, from really 1928 through 1953, right, when Stalin dies. And and then we'll also see some very similar things in Mao's China, similar to Stalinism, starting around 1955 or so. So 1955 to 75 in China, we see Stalinistic economic policies. All right, so we have that, and then on the other side of this equation, so above this line, right, so or in the middle on that traditional continuum, right, classical liberalism, right, classical liberalism, parliamentary democracy, parliamentary, or you also put federalist, right, federalist democracies, like the USA, the UK, Australia, Canada. Let's put ETC, right, in parentheses. All right, so classical liberalism, all right, and let's just kind of break this down kind of governmentally and economically. All right, so classical liberalism is if you are above this line, and if you are below this line, all right, we're really kind of dealing with autocratic, or maybe we can even throw out the word totalitarianism. Right, totalitarianism below this line. All right. So what kind of governmental realities do we see taking place within communist or socialist states or fascist regimes? Right, we typically see things like other political parties, are outlawed. Right? Other political parties are outlawed. Civil liberties. All right, civil liberties are restricted. What do we mean by civil liberties? You know, no freedom of the press, right? They will shut down any opposing news outlets. No freedom of speech. All right, so if what you are saying does not support the narrative in which is being espoused by the party, right, those things will be shut down or at least discredited. Okay, one of the other kind of classical things that we see during this is right the whole identification. Identify groups, right, to blame or target. Right? Identify groups to blame or target. And, in the case of, over here, we're going to be talking about Jews. In the case of over here, we're going to be talking about the kulaks. Yes. Okay. We're going to be talking about the kulaks. Okay. And, all right, so let's just kind of break down some of these economic similarities. All right. All right, so what are the economic similarities, right, between the two? All right, so let's just kind of run over and let's zoom in on, all right, let's kind of zoom in on Nazi Germany. All right, Nazi Germany. All right. And so what are some of the things that we kind of typically see within Nazi Germany? We see the private ownership, right? Private ownership of agriculture, private ownership of agriculture, retail trade. We see private ownership of small scale light industry. Okay. And also we see some heavy industry. Right, so chemicals and heavy manufacturing. And let's do some examples here of this. So like the Bayer Corporation. All right. Siemens Logistics Corporation. BMW, right? Bavarian Motor Works, Mercedes, Ford. Right? I'm going to throw Ford in there. Just like Coca-Cola. Companies, foreign companies, right, could also operate, within. Right, so this is actually kind of a good way to put it too. Foreign companies, right? Some were allowed to operate, right, within there, but we're also seeing here state control, right? Some state control of some heavy industry, right? Some heavy industry and raw materials, right? Some heavy industry and raw materials. So this is the economic reality of Nazi Germany. Okay. All right. So let's kind of slide this over, and let's look at some of right? Some of the economic policies of, let's just say, Lenin's NEP, right? Lenin's NEP, right? And it's also Khrushchev, right? Also Khrushchev, and then later Brezhnev, and I mean, really all the way going to Gorbachev, right? And Gorbachev will just kind of simply add some of this stuff, but essentially the economic policies of the Soviet Union, with the exception of Stalinism, right? Kind of with that exception, what are we seeing taking place, right? And what we see taking place is private ownership, right? And I guess we should say Lenin after the Russian Civil War, right? So obviously during the Russian Civil War, there is a war of communism. However, once the Civil War is done, then we institute the new economic policies, okay, the NEP. Right, so private ownership, so it's private ownership of what? Agriculture. Right, private ownership of agriculture, retail trade, small scale light industry. Right, and then we're going to see state control of heavy industry, and raw materials. Okay, so what are we not seeing here? We're not really seeing that foreign investment. Okay, we're not really seeing that kind of foreign investment. So let me just kind of highlight that. Right, those foreign companies. That would be a difference, right? Because we're not really seeing foreign companies in operation in the Soviet Union under Lenin, right? Really until we get to Gorbachev. But eventually, so I guess by the time you get to Gorbachev, you're going to see some foreign companies go in. All right, so there's that. Okay, so how are states responding to the economic crisis? In the case of Nazi Germany, you're seeing a whole host of mixture of private businesses mixed with with some state intervention and state directing raw materials and who has access and who doesn't have access to those raw materials. Okay, in the case of the Soviet Union, when the Great Depression hits, they're already going to be in the middle of their own kind of economic plan that predates the Great Depression. So Stalinism is going to use kind of a combination of things, one of which was already in place when the Great Depression hits. Right, so let me just kind of throw in a couple of things of Stalinism, and then we'll come back and talk about Stalinism in a minute. One is collectivization. Right, collectivization is referring to government control. Right, I'm off my thing, aren't I? Right, so let me zoom this in a little bit for you. Stalinization is referring to government-controlled agriculture. And of course, this is already in place, up and running by the time the Great Depression hit. So collectivization really would not be a reaction to the Great Depression. But the government control of industry, of all industry. Right. This is a second 5-year plan initiative. Right, and raw materials. Right. This is that whole central planning concept. right? That centrally planned economics that we see under Stalinism. All right, so this is Stalinism in the case of the Soviet Union is, the second 5-year plan, the central planning of heavy industry, right? This becomes our, the continued collectivization, right? You could say that those are the Soviet response to the Great Depression. All right. So these are kind of the basics there. So let's take a jump and look at classical liberalism, using a case study of the United States, which we did just have a slide up a second ago of this. Right, so we're going to talk really quick about Hoover and then about FDR. All right, so, in the case of classical liberalism, let's make this big. Oh, why'd that go? I forget that it does that. It jumps screen when I make it big, so I apologize. All right, so, in the case of the United States, up here on our little kind of economic and political spectrum, we can put conservatism, conservative, right, versus, right, liberal. We call that Democrat Party, and the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party, because those are the kind of case studies we're going to be looking at. So over on one side, we're going to be doing a little case study on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? And his policy, which was the New Deal, right? His policy, which was the New Deal. And then over here, we're going to look at Herbert, right? President Herbert Hoover, and how he reacted to the Great Depression. All right, so as far as governing, I'm not going to write in the kind of governmental things because I assume that since you live in the United States, how the government of classical liberalism functions, right? But I will say it verbally just so that you do have it, okay, in case you don't know. Political parties, right? Opposing political parties are tolerated and allowed to operate freely. Civil liberties are protected, right? They're probably the single most important thing that needs to be protected. So freedom of press, you are allowed to have news agencies, forms of media that go against official government narratives, right? That question the government. You are allowed to say what you want without being qualified and, or shut down or arrested for that kind of stuff. In the classical liberal democracies, you do not identify groups for targeting or blame. Those are, you believe in things like equality of opportunity. That is the goal, right, of classical liberalism. Right, so the blaming of groups would be very taboo in classical liberalism. Okay, all right. So what are we seeing here with Hoover? So Hoover is obviously the first of the political sides to deal with the Great Depression, since he is president in 1929 when the Great Depression hits. So what are some of the kind of things that we see Hoover do? Things like lower taxes, building projects, right? So some building projects. Let's give a couple of examples here. The Hoover Dam, which I guess would also be an infrastructure project since you are building in an electrical grid. Inherent irrigation going on as well with there. The Hoover Dam, often the Golden Gate Bridge gets cited here. And then, of course, right, the mistake, probably the single greatest mistake, that is made by Hoover, is the Smoot, right, M-O-O-T, Smoot-Hawley tariff. Right, the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Let me kind of zoom in on this kind of stuff, and this is definitely, when you hear Hoover, I often kind of think that Hoover gets a bad rap for how he handled the Great Depression. He used the kind of government mechanisms that he had available to them. He did try to do some building projects, but the Smoot-Hawley tariff was definitely this kind of, I don't think there's a way to argue this. This was definitely an economics faux pas. The design of it, so right? So the kind of goal, this is a tax on imports out of Europe, right? So the goal is to protect, right, same as all tariffs, protect industry, right? To protect American industry. However, the result is a trade war. And I'm just gonna say this because I don't have much room to write on this. If you're going to initiate a tariff, you have to expect a tariff in response from whatever country you put the tariff on. That's simply how it works, right? So you have to almost expect a trade war to take place. Depending upon your current balance of trade with that country, that's going to determine your success in the trade war. If you are a net exporter to said country, you're probably not going to do very good in the trade war. If you are running a trade deficit against the country, then you're probably going to fare pretty well in the case of a trade war. So, and the kind of example I usually tell students is in the 1920s and 30s, we were like the globe's modern day China. We were the kind of net exporter for most places around the world. The balance of trade put us into a trade surplus with most nations, which is why the Smoot-Hawley tariff had such a negative impact. It exacerbated the unemployment issues, and the consumer issues with the United States that the United States was experiencing, which is also why now things have kind of reversed. Use of tariffs and trade wars are starting to be seen, or at least were in the last administration, starting to be seen in an increasing amount. When you are running hundreds of billions of dollars a year trade deficit with a country, and you get into a trade war, who's going to get hurt worse? If you're running a massive deficit, you're probably going to be on the good side of that trade war. All right. So anyway, that's how Hoover attempted to deal with this, and some of his things were good, and FDR would emulate them, and of course some of those things were not good. Okay. All right. So let's go real quick into FDR. All right. So let's slide over here. Right. And what do we see with FDR? We see with him the application. Right, the application of Keynesianism. Right, Keynesianism. Right, or Keynesian economics. Right, so Keynesianism comes after the name of the British economist John Maynard Keynes. Right, and he espoused a few kind of ideas, things like government programs. Right, government programs to create jobs. Maybe you might need to make some reforms, put out stimulus checks, right? Putting money into the hand of the consumers, tax breaks, right? So anything that gives consumers more money, and that's kind of the big piece of this is give consumers more cash, right? Give consumers more money to stimulate economic growth. All right, so that's the kind of general idea behind Keynesianism, right? Or to put it into a different way, Let's do this. So if we have GDP, right, and here we have years, and this black ink line, the black ink line will represent laissez-faire capitalism. What you will see is over time a series of boom and bust cycles, right? A general trend upward. However, a series of boom or peak or bust or trough, right? Cycles, right? So what laissez-faire capitalism fails to do is prevent this cycle. It simply, continues. And what we see under Keynesianism, is an attempt to slow this boom down. So when you start to see the economy revving up, then try to put the brakes on it. Right, try to slow it down so that the booms don't become as good, and you will have a prolonged economic, economic growth. And then when things eventually turn, because they will eventually turn, there are ways that you can stimulate the economy so that the downside on this cycle is not as severe. Right, so to use an overused term from 2020, flatten the curves, okay? And, right, so to kind of explain what we're doing here, right? So we're talking about governmental policy to slow growth. And there's a whole bunch of ways you could do that. You can increase interest rates. Right, make it more expensive to borrow money. You can, what are some kind of other things that are typically done here? Increase taxes. Right, you can increase taxes. Right, take more money out of the hands of the consumers. You can reduce government spending. Right? Does the federal government really need to be helping the states when you're going through an economic boom? Right. So those are just a handful of things that can be done. And of course, when you're on that downswing, right? So when things start to go bad, right? So you can have government policy to stimulate growth. Right, so just do the exact kind of opposite things, right? You can decrease interest rates. Right, put more money into the system. You can decrease taxes. Right, so these are fiscal policy, or that'd be like Federal Reserve in the United States. This would be fiscal policy. Right, another fiscal policy. You can increase. Up, not down. Increase. Government spending. Okay, so anyway, this is the basic idea behind Keynesianism, right? Keynesian economics, right? And technically, we do see both Hoover and Roosevelt applying some of these ideas. Okay, so this is kind of where we left off. This is kind of where we are. All right, so let me just kind of move on real quick and talk about Stalinism, because when it comes to Stalinism and Stalin's economic policies, I think we kind of get into this once quick, then hopefully you'll recognize it when you see it again. When we start talking about China and Maoism, Mao, I mean, when you start talking about actually, Maoism and Mao being in control of China, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, is declared in October of 1949. So really from 1950 until 1955 or so, you're going to see Mao implementing these kind of Leninist MEP policies. And then, 1955, in China, you're going to start to see collectivization and then kind of heavy agriculture stuff, right? So because of, we are going to see this twice. Let's just look at Stalinism, right? Stalinism, right? What exactly is meant by Stalinism? And of course, looking at Stalinism, I haven't really ever come up with a great way to kind of look at Stalinism. So let's just do this. Let's just run a quick little timeline of Stalin's leadership, right? So from 1926 up until 1953 is when he is in control. And let's just kind of break this down a little bit. All right, so let's call this from 1928 through 1932. Let's call this 1933 through 1937. Let's call this 1938 through 1941. All right, and here we have Nazi invasion. All right, and World War II. That ends in 1945, and then we're not going to deal with these last couple of years. All right, so what are we kind of looking at here? We're looking at the first 5-year plan. All right, so when Stalin takes control around 1926 or so, he allows the NEP to kind of function and operate. And then in 1928, you start to see the beginning of Stalin's plans here. Right, so, and of course, his first 5-year plan focuses in on collectivization. Right, collectivization, and that is agriculture. All right, and then that'll bring us to the second 5-year plan. Right, and that second 5-year plan focuses in on heavy industry. And then our third 5-year plan gets stopped, and that was focused in on, or supposed to be focused in on, consumer goods, all right? But the Nazi invasion will cut that thing short, okay? And I've got a couple slides that I'm going to kind of run through with you in a minute, but I just want to kind of break Stalin's rule into a couple of different, time periods. All right, so we see here, all right, so 1932 to 33, all right, so right around here, just going to throw this here. This kind of major events. What is the Homodor? Right, the Homodor. It is estimated, if you're not familiar with the Homodor, sometimes it is referred to as the hunger extermination. The hunger extermination. It is estimated that 3.3 million Ukrainians starved to death. And what is definitely an example of genocide. Right, so we say that this is definitely an example of genocide because we know that the Ukraine was exporting grain during these years. We also know that France, the UK, the United States, we all knew what was going on, and we offered grain to Joseph Stalin, right? To Stalin, and Stalin refused to accept foreign help. So we offered him the grain to stop his people from starving to death, and he refused it. I have heard historians say that this is an intentional genocide as a punishment for the Ukraine declaring independence during the Russian Civil War. They use that time between the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and when the Reds win the Civil War to declare independence, and then they're forced back into Russia again, into the Soviet Union, and Stalin never forgave them for doing that. So the Holodomor is his punishment. So this is one of his kind of events during his rule that we need to kind of point out. And then also 1935. Let's kind of throw this in here. 1935 through 1930. I mean, it's really 8, but I'm going to put 39 in here. Right, this is known as the Terror. Right? The Terror. And of course, we're talking about 700,000 party members killed. All right, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million party members sent to the gulags. Of course, this is kind of the very famous show trials, right? The very famous show trials that were put on, and at this time. All right. The last little bit of Stalin's reign here. All right, let's just kind of throw a little Cold War here, right at the beginning of the Cold War. All right. So, and let me just kind of run through some of these facts for you here. And there's also, I think I did leave out one of the statistics here that you probably need to be aware of. One is during this collectivization. During this collectivization time period, we're going to have, we are going to have over 1 million, right? Over 1 million kulaks sent to the gulags for re-education. All right, so they will be exterminated. Okay. All right. So this is kind of a quick little rundown, and I'm just gonna kind of project the notes that go along with some of this stuff. All right. So the 5-year plans, right? This is obviously an example of class warfare by Stalin, right? Starting around the beginning, 1928, when the first 5-year plan begins. And of course, the agricultural productivity is going to plummet as a result of this, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about setting of quotas with these 5-year plans. No real consumer good focus, coal, steel, other raw materials, right, and agricultural output. So you hear these words gulags. There are up to 50 million people are going to be sent to the gulags. They will run from the time of Lenin until the time of Gorbachev. But they're going to see their peak use under Stalin. All right. Right. So by 1929, you've got 300,000, mostly kulaks in the gulags. By the time we get to 33, it's going to be up to 7 million. So industrialization will take place under Stalin through a quota-based labor system, right? A kidnapping quota-based system. So a form of coerced labor. Okay. Here's a kind of breakdown of the 5-year plan. So once again, collectivization is the first 5-year plan. They do succeed in some economic growth during this time, but they do not succeed in much agricultural growth. The second 5-year plan, heavy industry is the focus, and steel production does increase. But they fail to meet their coal and oil targets, right? And then the war breaks out, and then we're going to see rebuilding, during the post-war years, right, until Stalin dies in 1953. Okay, other kind of stuff here. First years of collectivization, estimated agricultural production would rise 50%. However, it actually dropped. Stalin blamed the kulaks, hence this becomes our target group. So because he blames the kulaks, the rich peasants who resisted collectivization. for better or for worse. Here's the Humidor. All right, as far as the terror, right? So that from 1935 until 38, 39, we use the same term as we use in the Jacobin era of the French Revolution. When you have a radical revolution, eventually the revolution will turn on itself and devour itself. And we see this with the terror, right? So we see a general purging of the party because of internal conspiracies and the enemies of the people. So this kind of great terror kind of peaks out in 1937 to 38. All right. And this is kind of the most telling part. I always kind of find this to be the most interesting thing. Percentage of party members, like Bolshevik party, right? So it become the Communist Party. The percentage of party members who had joined the party before 1921. So they were there, during the Civil War or earlier, right? So they fought with the Reds. In 1934, before the terror begins, 81%, right? 81% of the party had been in the Communist Party since at least the ending of the Civil War. Long-time loyal party members. By the time we get through this time period where the party will devour itself, party membership, long-term party membership is going to be down to 19%. It's the western portions of Russia are going to be most hard hit. Leningrad, right, to western. Anyone who is a perceived threat, is going to get targeted. So we're going to see all these show trials. So very similar to what we see under the Jacobin. Interesting book came out a few years ago, On Stalin's Team by Sheila Fitzpatrick. I always kind of found this kind of quote to be interesting, right? So we have a couple of army marshals talking to each other, and they know they're bad, right? And they're talking about the others that are arrested, right? They simply say to each other, "Don't worry, they're only arresting the clever ones." Okay, and so we see the who is most hardest hit in this in this terror. We see people who with technical knowledge, scientists, artists, and of course a complete decapitation of the army itself. When you have to kind of beg the question, exactly how many more lives in World War II had to be given by the Soviets because of this. When you decapitate your most experienced and trusted, of your military, of your military leadership, and you are about to get into war with World War II, how much of a difference does this make? Could Hitler have been defeated easier? If this had not happened, and I don't think there's any way to say no to that. Okay, all right. So that's about it for today. I think I've kind of gone on long enough. So the Great Depression, right, results in the centralized economic and political authority of all industrialized states. Right, we do see kind of rise of new democracies. These new democracies, referring to fascism. And we'll get into that in the next couple of days as well. All right, and we'll kind of get into this communist violence and fascist violence in the coming days too. All right, that's all for today. Sapriati.